Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Thanks for joining me today, guys. If you haven't seen that first video with Giltaca, the Executive Director of the CCFR, where we do an in-depth breakdown of everything you need to know as a Canadian firearms owner, what you need to do to advocate for firearms rights, and if you're new to this whole thing, what you should be looking for in a firearm. In today's video, we're going to be talking with Rod, who's actually a big-time prepper, all about emergency preparedness. I assure you, there's probably some ideas in here that you haven't heard anywhere else before. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Don't forget, guys, it's imperative now more than ever before that you go and become a member of the CCFR. They're the one organization that has a fighting chance to preserve whatever gun rights we do have left as Canadians. So make sure you go and do it right after this video. The best $40 that you'll ever spend.
One other interesting thing you said that I wanted to just kind of go back to was, and I'm curious, this transition from being a non-gun owner to being a gun owner, because you had said kind of off the cuff there that I never felt the need to own a gun before, you know, for having this experience in the States. So what, because I have a feeling that this is the case for most people who don't understand firearms, is they were that person. And I was that same guy too. I was the guy who thought, oh, why do people need guns? You know, gun owners are just, you know, sadistic maniacs who are just looking for a fight type thing. How does a person, you know, what was the switch? I know for me it was preparedness. For me it was this realization that, you know, the world is increasingly more a precarious place. I need to learn how to hunt my own food and all the other things that come along with gun ownership, right? What was it for you? What was the switch? And because I think it's very important to focus on that transition, because that is how you're going to, because most people were like you and me, you know, so how do we get them to the other side?
Well, I think initially when the first time I shot a handgun was down at just outside of Camp Pendleton Marine Corps Base in 60 miles north of San Diego, California. And initially it was almost like the same feeling that someone that gets into drag racing gets. You know, the first time they drive a drag car, you know, a powerful car on the track, they're like, oh, this is awesome, harnessing this power. So that was the initial rush. That's one of the things that's exciting about shooting guns, right? So I was like, oh, this is really great. But owning firearms, and I think most firearm owners will agree, that when you become a firearm owner, it changes you. It changes the way you look at everything. And it's hard to ever imagine yourself not owning guns. And for me, what it was it was a sense of accountability for myself and independence. Like I don't need anyone to feed me or provide food for me. If I needed to, I could go out and hunt for my own food. I don't need another man. If something happens and I'm, you know, my family's under threat, I don't need to call another man with a gun to come and defend me. I can do that for myself, you know, and you don't want to do that without training, because there's a lot that goes into that. Like we won't get into it now, but a lot of different dimensions when you're thinking about that. And I got hyper interested in that. I'm like, well, I don't want to be somebody that's, you know, running around with a gun, you know, saying, well, if anybody tries to do this or that, like I want to be a competent individual, at least meet or exceed the level of training and competence that law enforcement does. And that was just something I got really interested in. And I exceeded that dramatically. Right? I mean, I never was a police officer, never was in the military, but the raw training that I got was infinitely more than 80% of police officers in Canada. And that just made me feel so much more in control of my life. And at the same time, it made me far less aggressive, because it's like, you don't ever want to be in a gunfight. Like this, I think that's what a lot of people don't understand, these leftists, you know, to speak of, or anti-gun people. They think that somebody like me wants to get into a gunfight. Like if you get into a gunfight, like everybody gets shot. It's horrible. It's the last thing in the world that you want. It's not television. It's real life. And guns are dangerous. If you get shot, you could die, or you could, you know, have to wear a bag for the rest of your life, or you may not have use of your arm for the rest of your life. Like you don't want anything to do with gunfights. But it's a feeling of control over your own life and independence. If you're competent with something, just like a martial artist feels confident walking down the street, because they're like, you know what, if somebody decides that they want to take my life because of whatever their own problem is, I can defend myself. I don't have to be that victim. I don't want to be that victim. And I know I'm going on, but this is kind of important. It's an interesting dynamic that all of these people, these anti-gun people that consider themselves anti-violence, they'll watch little kids go to Taekwondo, little 5-year-old kids, tiny tigers, right? All learning how to kick and punch and choke and break limbs and all the rest of that stuff. And that doesn't bother them a bit. And how much more likely is it for someone to perpetrate violence upon someone else with hands and feet, right? That happens every day, every 10 minutes in Canada. I don't know, whatever that number is. It happens all the time. Yeah. But that's not a problem. It's just the guns are a bridge too far when you never see licensed, like literally almost never. I mean, there are exceptions to every rule, but you almost never see licensed gun owners involved in firearm-related violence. Almost never.
Because there's such a vetting process, and not everybody, I mean, you can't have one if you have a criminal record. If you have, if you're recently divorced,
History of violence.
History of violence.
Now, the system does break down, and people with those things have been given firearms licenses. Or people, sometimes their circumstances change. Like a lot of the gun control concerns, right? A lot of concerns that Canadians have. Like I share those concerns. I don't want people with a history of violence getting hold of firearms. I don't want people that are in a really bad place in their life and angry and acting out in a violent way that own guns. I don't want them to keep their guns. I want them to get help or to solve their problem. Like those are reasonable things. But the way that the government goes about those things and implements those things by basically taking my gun away because of the acts of criminals, it's completely unreasonable. But anyway, just the point of people see people training for violence everywhere, and that's okay. But to even simply own a gun, even if it's for hunting or for sport shooting, that apparently is not okay. So it's just a kind of a testament to where the conversation's gone in Canada. It's no longer reasonable, and it's very difficult.
Well, there's a lot of associations, I think, with the gun and, like we talked about, politics. We were having a conversation the other day about how we view ourselves as having changed as a species, like that we're different now, and that we're less violent inherently. But as we talked about, as the pandemic brought out of people, and as this current conflict is going on, we're seeing that people are capable of doing bad things just like they were for tens of thousands of years. And if we continue to endure hard times as a society, and the economy starts to unwind, and things go to hell in a handbasket, then those services are going to be even less reliable. So we're going to we'll be in a position where we're forced to kick and punch and learn Taekwondo. So the gun is just another tool, like your fists are a tool, and they can be used for good or bad. Obviously some of the anti-gun people might say, well, yeah, but there's a greater potential to inflict, inordinate amounts of violence. But I don't know. I mean,
yeah, guns are dangerous. But I think going back to your point about, we think we've changed. We haven't changed. People are no different now than they were in the late 30s or in the early 40s or any other time, or in the caveman days. We're still the same. We still have that same potential for bad behavior and violence and all the rest of that stuff. And the difference is that most people, certainly in first world countries in the West, have what they need. And I have my own little idiom that I live by, which is, and feel free to use it, is a man's morality is directly proportional to his access to resources. And I thought I thought that up because I'm like, well, what is it that creates violence and creates this bad behavior? What is it that brings out the primal animal in people? It's their access to resources. So the accountant 2 doors down, who wouldn't hurt a fly, who's, doesn't own a gun, doesn't whatever, he's, always, very soft or whatever. You see how that person changes when his kids go without food for 10 days, when he's watching his kids starve. See how irrational and angry and frustrated and violent a person like that will become when they don't have access to what they need. And, it's funny because, from a preparation point of view, it's like I know a lot of people that don't have guns, and I know a lot of people that are anti-gun, but still somehow want some kind of strange relationship with me, even though I'm a gun owner and, involved with the CCFR. Yeah. But every one of them has always said, well, if stuff if shit gets real, I'm coming to your place. And I'm like, well, why would you come to my house? Why would you do that? Why would you think that coming to my house is a better option than staying in your own home or calling the police? And it's funny because until it gets real, people are allowed to live in this fantasy because they have everything they need right now to varying degrees, right? But they certainly have the basics. So, from a preparation point of view, it is probably a great idea to own firearms. It's a great idea to have training, to do it now while it's easy. This is off the shelf stuff, right? Think about these things ahead of time, because when things get difficult, you're not going to have access to training. You're not going to have access to ammunition. You're not going to have access to firearms or a variety of other things. And then you'll also see all the other people that don't have access to what they need become what people can be, and they can get pretty primal.
Yeah, and I think, the whole I'm coming to your house, a lot of people, I've long since suspected that same carelessness that people approach the issue of preparedness with, like the people who are like, well, like I hear it often, I wouldn't want to survive anyways if things went, that crazy.
Okay.
It's like if nuclear war happened, I wouldn't want to live in that environment anyways. I'll just die. And the problem is, no, you won't, because you'll still be walking around and when it actually occurs to you what's going on, that same kind of carelessness that caused you to not prepare will then be what drives you in that circumstance, which is going to likely get you to do, bad things. And you'll likely be one of the zombies, right? Nobody wants to be one of the zombies. The zombies are a metaphor for the unprepared who are, just looking to feed their most primal instincts,
Desperate.
Get their needs met. Yeah, right. Would you consider yourself a prepper, and what is the role of firearms in preparedness? What is the relationship there?
Well, I would consider I was I guess you could say a prepper before it was cool, only from the perspective of I don't want to be dependent on anybody else. I don't want anybody else to have to look after me, to look at me and be like, oh, this poor guy, am I going to take pity on him? I just want to be responsible and accountable for my own life and whatnot. But I would consider myself a fair weather prepper. I actually had a course that we taught in our business about preparedness. And I always broke it down to, you got, kind of your 1 month prepper, level of preparedness to 6 months. 6 months, I think is, I could probably be independent for 6 months to a year. But then you have the long-term stuff, right? Where you're like, okay, well, our system isn't coming back. I'm not prepared for that, but I can get to a year pretty comfortably. But firearms are essential, because people that don't have what they need are going to at some point be desperate enough to do whatever it takes to get those things. And at that point, we won't have a gun debate anymore. We won't be worried about what people are saying on Twitter, And at that point, if you're not prepared at that point, you're not going to be prepared. You're going to be one of the people that are desperate, and I don't want to be that person personally.
Mm-hmm. So you gave courses on emergency preparedness. So is there any advice to try to blend the two things for preppers who are just getting into firearms in Canada, we'll say? Is there like a certain firearm that you would suggest starting with if a person was on a limited budget? Would it be a .22, a shotgun, a semi-auto? What would you recommend?
Well, it's hard to say because guns are just tools. And it's funny because people say, well, why do you need so many guns? And it's like, well, look at all the tools I have, right? I have a special wrench for taking off oil filters that no other wrench will do, but that wrench is not good for anything else at all. It's a strap wrench, right? So guns are like that. So I always, back in the day when I had my channel and I was more, focused on just guns instead of trying to keep them, I always said that you need 5 guns. You need a .22 for fun, but also for very small game. And, it's cheap ammunition to stockpile. Yeah. And for training to some degree, depending on the firearm itself. But a .22, you need a hunting rifle, which can actually be a precision rifle as well. So a .308 is what I would always recommend it, because I always want common ammunition that you can pick up anywhere. When all the ammunition, the ammunition that's most plentiful in your society. And then kind of a combat style rifle, because it's probably good for you to know how to use one of those. And I would always recommend an AR-15, although times have changed. Now, apparently that's just too dangerous for me to own one of those, but something similar to that, something that's going to shoot 5.56 and 2.23 chambered in 5.56, because you can shoot 2.23 out of it, which is important because there's a lot of that ammunition.
You can't shoot 5.56 out of a 2.23. Only 2.23 out of 5.56.
Well, you can, but it's not safe.
Not safe.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then of course something that uses AR-15 magazines, because those are plentiful. And then a shotgun is always great. It's good for predator defense. It's good for
geese, ducks.
Yeah, exactly. Hunting. So it's a multi-use firearm there. And what was the last one?
Possibly something we can't access anymore.
22. Oh, and a handgun. And a handgun. That's right. So a handgun, just because you should know how to use one of those. You know, I've been very fortunate in my firearms training business instructing, because, you know, I can use 20 different handguns. You know, and as it may sound a little weird to say, but it's always a good skill to be able to pick up any firearm off the ground and be able to operate it. So it's good to get to know different firearms, because it might not always be your gun that you'll have access to. So those 5 guns: handgun, semi-automatic rifle, a bolt action hunting rifle, a 22, and a shotgun, 12 gauge for the shotgun. So 5.56, 12 gauge, 22s, 9 mil for a handgun, because those are very, very plentiful as well. So those are common calibers. That's my advice.
So I'm on a budget, right? I can only get one of those. What's the first one I would get if I was, you know, of a person who is just getting into all aspects of preparedness? The
Swiss Army knife is a 12 gauge shotgun. 12 gauge, yeah.
That's what I figured. And would you go with a smooth bore or a rifled bore, or what would you?
Yeah, just a cylinder bore, a smooth bore, you know, because you can shoot anything you want out of there. You can shoot slugs out of there, or all the way down to birdshot and up to buckshot.
Any other suggestions with respect to, you know, like the size of the barrel? Because I know I have a Mossberg that I can't hit the broadside of a barn with that thing. You know, it looks cool, but maybe I just suck at shooting it. I don't know. But is there other considerations? Like, should people be intimidated by the longer barrels, or because they're obviously a bit more accurate, right?
Yeah, longer barrel is more difficult to manage too. So something with an 18-inch barrel is just fine. That's your all around. And the Mossberg, specifically the Maverick 88, that was my first shotgun. Yeah. And they are lightweight and reliable, and they work, and they'll shoot everything if you got the cylinder bore it comes with, and these are it's a Swiss Army knife. You can shoot birds with it. You can shoot large animals. You can defend yourself in close range from predators. It's just, man.
Some people are going to think we're working for Joe Biden, you know.
Yeah.
He's the...
Just let off 2 blasts.
Yeah.
Double barrel shotgun.
Get a shotgun, man. Come on.
Well, he's going to issue them to the U.S. Armed Forces, because it's obviously all you need.
Yeah, exactly.
Defend yourself, right? Double barrel shotgun.
That's all for anybody who's fighting over there in the Eastern Front. That's all you need.
Yeah, you can send cases of those to Ukraine, and it'll make quick work of the Russians, apparently.
So, I mean, we had a bit of a discussion about, you know, getting to know your community. And would you have any advice on strategic relocation, and maybe what should a person be doing now, I guess, in anticipation of that? Because bug out fantasies and, you know, like getting in the 4-wheeler and going out into the mountains is not a reality, you know, that a lot of people are going to be able to do. And even if they were, you're not going to survive that long. You know, you're going to survive till your resources run out. In terms of a shelter in place, security perspective, what should people be thinking about?
Well, it's the best way to survive is if you have a community around you, you know, geographically, physically, right? The people that are around you can be your biggest allies, because you can't really survive that long by yourself, you know, depending on what happens. I mean, for me, I think in terms, and I mean, none of us really know what's going to happen, but there are varying degrees of adversity, of collapse, if you will. Yeah, varying degrees of it, right? I mean, what could be very likely to happen is something that sort of runs in between the fantasy, right? I got to get out of town and live in the bush, which is a very short-term solution. You're just going to run out of things. You're going to get an infection. You're going to, something's going to happen. You're going to have a heart attack. You're going to break your ankle. There's a lot of things outside of our society, they're going to be a showstopper for you, right? But what's more likely to happen is you'll have this cascading economic collapse, right? It's not going to be everything's, unless there's an EMP kind of thing, and everything gets shut off at once. But there might be a famine, there might be food shortages, hyperinflation, there could be all kinds of things like that happening. And the best way, I'm just speaking for myself, is number one, I've cut down my my overhead as much as I could. I don't like to carry any debt. I'm living smaller than I used to, right? And my kids are grown up, they're out of the house. So now I'm living in a smaller, a smaller footprint life, so that I can afford, even if my purchasing power is cut by half, I can still make it by on the resources that I have. So that's important to me, because that could be something that slowly shows up. Food prices go through the roof, and I can still afford to eat. I'll have to be a lot more, I can't throw as much away and whatnot. But I think those are things that you can prepare. Make sure your overhead is as small as it possibly can be, without, obviously, I'm saying move into a shoebox. We still want to enjoy this life while we still have it. It's not ever going to be any better than this. So there's that. And then, and I think food and water is the most important thing for me. I mean, I have defense covered, obviously, but food and water, I invested in a really great water filtration system, so that I could actually put, anything, puddle water, stagnant, terrible water in the top, and I get fresh water at the bottom. Like, even though I paid a lot of money for that.
Is it Berkey or?
It is, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's simple too, right? And it's great for larger groups if you had to. Like those little life straws and stuff, they're great for, personal use, and they're great in a pinch.
Yeah, in a pinch.
But they're not good for long term.
Yeah, and you need clean water. Especially if you don't have access to modern medicine, you need clean water. You can't start getting, dysentery or some kind of stomach infection from, drinking toxic water. That's going to be the end of you, probably.
Now, without giving anything away, you obviously are nicely situated, and you have a boat now, which is cool. You live in an environment that, is very, if things did get weird, you'd be able to have that community come together, hopefully, and be able to protect that community. But I really think that what you're saying, and this is tough for preppers, right? Because we're all very independently minded. We're all very like lone wolf types.
One thing that might be worth looking into is getting to know the people in your general area. I mean, one thing you could do is use Facebook as a tool just to connect with your local community. Like when I lived in the city I just moved out of, there were a couple of pages that were, just for that community. And, people like, oh, somebody was, taking Amazon packages. Has anybody seen this guy? Or, oh, I got a lost cat. Or, I heard the mayor's looking to do this or whatever. Those kinds of groups are interesting because you can start your own Facebook group. Obviously, you have to be careful what you say on there for a variety of different reasons. But if you keep it nice and centered, very vanilla, nothing to just be like, hey, you know what? Here's a group, just so you know. We don't want to get into too much political discussion, but if you want to connect with other people in case there's some kind of an emergency, a natural disaster, some kind of, just so that we can help each other in the physical, geographical, small area that we're in, then that might be a good group to start. And you're not going to get a lot of people just for a variety of reasons, but it's good at least you've connected with a few people, and that little network can grow, especially if things get weird. But I think if I were to provide any advice on that is be really careful. If you're going to sort of self-appoint yourself as the organizer and then / kind of leader, just because you're the organizer, keep the politics out of it. Keep the too much discussion. You have to be you have to build a big tent so that everybody feels welcome there, because all of this political stuff and your ideology and all that will melt away when your priorities come right down to, okay, we have to make sure that none of us get looted. We have to make sure that everybody's going to get what they need. The differences that you have with other people will probably melt away later. So you don't want to have those differences start presenting themselves in your group. You got to keep all that out of there. So keep the politics out, keep the theories of what these disasters might look like out, because those lead to politics and lead to ideological conversations. Just be like, hey, does anybody want to be part of this group? And we're going to keep it really, really light. Just at least we know who each other are. We know where a meeting place is, if there's a massive earthquake or whatever, and we can look after each other. And if you can police that, make sure that that group doesn't turn into, a 4chan kind of thing where, everybody but the most extreme voices are scared out. Now you have no network, right? Always keep in consideration what your goal is. And it's to have a network of people with different skills and whatnot to support each other when there's no outside support.
I think it says a lot to how important this politicking is, that it's very superficial, that in times of crisis, it all goes by the wayside, right? It's a luxury that we can argue with each other about, these things and have these varying perspectives of these issues that we are so contentious. But I think having, even if you're, like you're saying, even connecting with a few people, that could be what forms the crux of a network of people. Because when things do happen, everybody's going to be looking for guidance. And then you're going to have this power vacuum emerge, and somebody's going to fill it, and how do you ensure that power vacuum is not filled by the wrong people? Because that could happen, right?
Well, strength in numbers, right? You can ensure that if your network is fairly large and the people with maybe a little bit too much self-interest, their network isn't as big because they didn't build that big tent, right? They scared a lot of people off. And that's why, leadership is, effective leadership. You have to be honest, you have to have high integrity, and you have to be uncompromising in that integrity. And if you do that, then people will trust you and they'll be in your group. But if you start a group that's really caters to you and a few friends that like to discuss, every political situation down to its nth degree, and you're excluding everyone, you're not gonna have a big network. And even if you're the one that's trying to lead a community, you just won't have the support. You got to build that big tent. And then all of those things that divide you later, those will all melt away. We were talking earlier about the work, the kind of work that I do. It's difficult because, we're on social media, we're fighting with people all the time. People are saying the worst things in the world to us to try to discredit us and whatnot. And I said, well, I'm resilient to that because I just remember when Twitter's going crazy, I think of a picture of the Milky Way and 100 million stars and all the planets around that stars and this one little speck, which is our planet. And it's like, oh, I'm worried about what someone's saying on Twitter. On this little, you know what I mean?
So it's like the Carl Sagan pale blue dot.
Yeah, this is the thing. And you realize well, who cares what some nameless person, and there are people that aren't real people on Twitter. Forget about those things. So all those things divide us. So build the big tent, keep the conversation very focused, be the cool-headed leader that you need, or be the number 2 or number 5 in that hierarchy. There's nothing wrong with that. That's really important. There's a place for everybody in these kinds of networks, and you don't have to be the person on top of the pyramid. It's meaningless. The whole point is we're all trying to look after each other and weather the storm until things get kind of reorganized. If that's the challenge that we're facing, it's some kind of food collapse or economic collapse or whatever. Those are long emergencies, right? So even in the short-term ones, the lights go out and they're not coming back on. It's good to have people around, and you won't be fighting about politics.
Do you see more people, in your own circle, getting more involved in preparedness? And is that a big part of why people, contact you or have contacted you in the past with respect to, getting training or things of that nature? Do you think it's expanding, or do you think it's just the same, nothing's changing? It doesn't matter how many disasters, people are still going to be as complacent as ever, or is it shifting a little bit?
I think people's attitudes are always shifting. And, there's always going to be 30 or 40% of the population, that's an unqualified number, but that's just my feeling, that are completely oblivious and that they've been propagandized into oblivion. They're doing everything they can just to hang on, but I think anyone that could be woken up to the fact that they're going to, at some point be 100% accountable for their life. So right now none of us are really 100% accountable, at some level. But at some point, we will be 100% accountable for every aspect of your life. The 30 or 40%, they'll never wake up. But I think most people have figured out like, maybe the system isn't as secure, as stable as I thought it was, and it's looking more unstable all the time. Especially if you look at what's going on with farms and fertilizer use and whatnot. That's a very serious problem. And hopefully people are waking up. I've been out of the training game for a number of years, so people don't come to me for training anymore. But I would think that the people that could be woken up are waking up now, and they're getting concerned and starting to stockpile a few things and think about their independence.
It's definitely been harder to break the ice with Canadians than it is Americans. Americans take the prepping really easily. But Canadians, I think, were a little bit more insulated from some of the problems of the world, perhaps. And it's been challenging. It's been an uphill battle, but I do believe that, the tide is turning on that. And I guess the only big concern for Canadians who are focused on that sort of thing is, it's one thing to store food. It's one thing to stockpile food. It's another thing altogether to be able to grow it and to be able to focus on that long term. So you made that distinction between the 6-month and beyond prepper, which is a whole other realm of things. I call them macro preppers, or a lot of people just call them homesteaders, but having those skills is definitely important. And in Canada, it's very important. Where you live, you're fortunate to live in one of the best zones for growing food, in the country. And unfortunately, though, I think the majority of the population isn't in those zones, right? The majority is tucked away in some urban center that is very cold in the winter, and you can grow grains and maybe a few other things, but you can't grow BC fruits and vegetables, right? Mm-hmm. So I think you lucked. Well, I shouldn't say you lucked out, but
I'm here for a reason.
Yeah, you live here for a reason, and that just goes into that strategic relocation bit. In that we do still have time to. I think that a lot of, without getting into the hypothesizing about what is going to come, I do feel that there's a confluence of things right now which are contributing or make me bearish on the world, we'll say, just to put it lightly. And for that reason, that's why I think that preparedness is a good thing, whether those are man-made or things that are outside of our control. I think there's a lot of, I think it's logical to like you say, be prepared to take responsibility, full responsibility for everything, because someday the trucks might just stop rolling, and that's just the fact. Everything, all those people in the city are being kept alive by trucks who come in every day and bring energy, food, water. When that stops, it's it, so... hopefully it never stops. Hopefully, I'm still more confident than most people think with respect to our ability to be resilient. And in some ways, I would actually say that the pandemic showed we are, in fact, resilient. And, but the pandemic happening, we got a war happening, we got, climate stuff happening. All these things happen at once, it's okay if they happen in succession. But if everything just kind of hits at once, then the system starts to break down, and we could potentially have things of a magnitude that would necessitate what we're talking about, in terms of that level of preparedness. So, all right, guys. So I want to thank Rod for having me once again. I would encourage you to go check out his channel for Civil Advantage. Also, go check out the first video that we did where we talk all about various firearms laws in Canada. We demystify some things, and he gives some advice for beginners who are just getting into shooting. And make sure you go and check out the CCFR $40 membership. Can't go wrong. Anyways, man, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It's my pleasure.
Right on. Take care.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.